Ah, welcome. Warm yourself by the fire. Have a seat or snuggle up in your favorite spot and let me tell you a story. But first, please, subscribe, like, and share. Much like battlefield stories, the stories from the sea have been long told by man since they first recorded and sailed the great expanses of earthly waters. Some stories can be attributed to fanciful imagination, a need for attention, fear, or a myriad of other things. Some stories may have a kernel of truth, if you will, or cannot be explained by man's limitations at all. The two following stories were recorded as true events by Hereward Carrington. Their truth will be left up to you. Story 1. Heave the Lead. In the year 1664, Captain Thomas Rogers, commander of a ship called the Society, was bound on a voyage from London to Virginia. The vessel, being sent light to Virginia for the loading of tobacco, carried little freight in her outward hold. One day, when they made an observation, the mates and the officers brought their books and cast upon their reckonings with the captain to see how near they were to the coast of America. They all agreed that they were 100 leagues from the Capes of Virginia. Upon these customary reckonings, and heaving the lead, and finding no ground at 100 fathoms, they set the watch, and the captain turned in. The weather was fine. A moderate gale of wind blew from the coast, so that the ship might have to run about 12 or 13 leagues in the night after the captain was in his cabin. He fell asleep, and slept very soundly for about 3 hours, when he woke again and lay still till he heard his second mate turn out and relieve the watch. He then called his first mate, as he was going off watch, and asked him how all things fared. The mate answered that all was well, though the gale had freshened, and they were running at a great rate, but it was a fair wind and a fair, clear night. The captain then went to sleep again. About an hour after, he dreamed that someone had pulled him and bade him to turn out and look abroad. He, however, lay still and went to sleep again, but was suddenly reawakened. This occurred several times, and though he knew not what was the reason, yet he found it impossible to go to sleep any more. Still, he heard the vision say, "Turn out and look abroad." The captain lay in this state of uneasiness nearly 2 hours, until finally he felt compelled to don his great coat and go on deck. All was well. It was a fine clear night. The men saluted him, and the captain called out, "How is she heading?" "Southwest by south, sir," answered the mate. "Fair for the coast, and the wind east by north." Very good," said the captain. As he was about to return to his cabin, something stood by him and said, "Heave the lead." Upon hearing this, the captain said to the second mate, "When did you heave the lead, and at what water had you?" "About an hour ago, sir," replied the mate. 60 fathoms. "Heave again," the captain commanded. When the lead was cast, they had ground at 11 fathoms. This surprised them all, but much more when at the next cast it came up 7 fathoms. Upon this, the captain, in a fright, bid them put the helm alee and about ships. All hands ordered to back the sails, as is usual in such cases. The proper orders being observed, the ship stayed and came about, but before the sails filled, she had but 4 fathoms and a half of water under her stern. As soon as she filled and stood off, they had 7 fathoms again, and at the next cast, 11 fathoms, and so on to 20 fathoms. They then stood off to seaward all the rest of the watch to get into deep water until daybreak, when, being a clear morning, The Capes of Virginia were in fair view under their stern, and but a few leagues distance. Had they stood on but one cable length further as they were going, they would have run ashore, and certainly lost their ship, if not their lives, all due to the erroneous reckonings of the previous day. Who or what was it that waked the captain and bade him save the ship? That he has never been able to tell. Story 2. The Rescue at Sea. The following famous narrative is taken from Mr. Robert Dale Owens's collection printed in his Footfalls on the Boundary of Another World and the Debatable Land Between This World and the Next. It is quite a famous case, and is vouched for by Mr. Owen. It is as follows. Mr. Robert Bruce, descended from the same branch of the Scottish family of the same name, was born in humble circumstances about the close of the 18th century at Torby, in the south of England, and there bred up to a seafaring life. When about 30 years of age in the year of 1828, he was first mate on board a bark trading between Liverpool and St. John's, New Brunswick. On one of her voyages, bound westward, being then some 5 or 6 weeks out, and having neared the eastern portion of the banks of Newfoundland, the captain and the mate had been on deck at noon, taking an observation of the sun, after which they both descended to calculate their day's work. The cabin, a small one, was immediately at the stern of the vessel, and the short stairway descended to it. It ran athwart ships. Immediately opposite to the stairway, just beyond a small square landing, was the mate's stateroom. And from that landing, there were 2 doors close to each other, the one opening aft into the cabin, and the other fronting the stairway into the stateroom. The desk in the stateroom was in a forward part of it, and close to the door, so that anyone sitting at it, and looking over his shoulder, could see into the cabin. The mate, absorbed in his calculations, which did not result as he expected, varying considerably from the dead reckoning, had not noticed the captain's motions. When he had completed his calculations, he cried out, without looking around, "I make our latitude and longitude so-and-so. Can that be right? How is yours, sir?" Receiving no reply, he repeated the question, glancing over his shoulder and perceiving, as he thought, the captain busy at his slate. Still, no answer. Thereupon he rose, and as he fronted the cabin door, the figure he had mistaken for the captain raised his head, and disclosed to the astonished mate the features of an entire stranger. Bruce was no coward, but he met that fixed gaze, looking directly at him in grave silence, and became assured that it was no one whom he had ever seen before. It was too much for him, and instead of stopping to question the seeming intruder, he rushed upon deck in such an evident alarm that it instantly attracted the captain's attention. "Why, Mr. Bruce," said the captain, "what in the world is the matter with you?" "The matter, sir? Who is at your desk?" No one that I know of." "But there is, sir. There is a stranger there." "A stranger? Why, man, you must be dreaming. You must have seen the steward there or the second mate. Who else would venture down without orders?" "But, sir, he was sitting at your armchair, fronting the door, writing on your slate. Then he looked up in my face, and if I ever saw a man plainly and distinctly in the world, I saw him." "Him who?" "Heavens knows, sir. I don't know. I saw a man I've never seen in my life before." "You must be going crazy, Mr. Bruce. A stranger, and we nearly 6 weeks out." The captain descended the stairs, and the mate followed him. Nobody in the cabin. They examined the staterooms. Not a soul could be found. "Well, Mr. Bruce," said the captain, "did I not tell you that you had been dreaming?" "It's all very well to say, sir, but if I didn't see that man writing on the slate, may I never see my home and family again." "Ah, writing on the slate. Then it should still be there." And the captain took it up. "By heavens," he exclaimed, "there's something sure enough. Is this your writing, Mr. Bruce?" The mate took the slate, and there, in plain legible characters, stood the words, "Steer to the northwest." The captain sat down at his desk, the slate before him in deep thought. At last, turning the slate over and pushing it toward Bruce, he said, "Write down, steer northwest." The mate complied, and the captain, comparing the two handwritings, said, "Mr. Bruce, go and tell the second mate to come down here." He came down at the captain's request, and he also wrote the words. So did the steward. So in succession did every man of the crew who could write at all. But not one of the various hands resembled in any degree the mysterious writing. When the crew retired, the captain sat deep in thought. "Could anyone have been stowed away?" At last he said. "The ship must be searched. Order up all hands." Every nook and corner of the vessel was thoroughly searched. Not a living soul was found. Accordingly, the captain decided to change the vessel's course according to the instructions received. A lookout was posted, who shortly reported an iceberg, and then shortly after, a vessel close to it. As they approached, the captain's glass disclosed the fact that it was a dismantled ship, apparently frozen to the ice. It proved to be a vessel from Quebec, bound for Liverpool with passengers on board. She had got entangled in the ice and finally frozen fast, and had passed several weeks in a most critical situation. She was stove, her decks swept, in fact a mere wreck, all her provisions and almost all her water gone. Her crew and passengers had all but lost hope of being saved, and their gratitude at the unexpected rescue was proportionately great. As one of the men who had been brought away in the third boat ascended the ship's side, the mate, catching a glimpse of his face, started back in consternation. It was the very face that he had seen 3 or 4 hours before, looking up at him from the captain's desk. He communicated this fact to the captain. After the comfort of the passengers had been seen to, the captain turned to the stranger and said to him, "I hope, sir, you will not think that I'm trifling with you, but I would be much obliged to you if you would write a few words on this slate." He handed him the slate, with the side up on which the mysterious writing was not. "I will do anything you ask," replied the passenger. "But what shall I write?" "A few words are all that I want. Suppose you write, steer to the northwest." The passenger, evidently puzzled to make out the motive of such a request, complied, however, with a smile. The captain took up the slate and examined it closely. Then, stepping aside so as to conceal the slate from the passenger, he turned it over and gave it to him the other side up. "You say this is your handwriting," he said. "I need not say so," replied the man, looking at it, "for you saw me write it." "And this," said the captain, turning the slate over. The man looked first at one writing and then at the other, quite confounded. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked. "I only wrote one of these. Who wrote the other?" "That is more than I can tell you, sir. My mate here says you wrote it, sitting at this desk, at noon today." The captain of the wreck and the passenger looked at each other, exchanging glances of intelligence and surprise, and the former asked the latter, "Did you dream that you wrote this on this slate?" "No, sir, not that I remember." "You speak of dreaming," said the captain of the bark. "Where was this gentleman at noon today?" "Captain," rejoined the captain of the wreck, "the whole thing is most mysterious and extraordinary, and I had intended to speak to you about it as soon as we got a little quiet. This gentleman," pointing to the passenger, "being much exhausted, fell into a heavy sleep, or what seemed such, some time before noon. After an hour or more, he awoke and said to me, "Captain, we shall be relieved this very day." And when I asked him what reason he had for saying so, he replied that he had dreamed that he was on board a bark and that she was coming to our rescue. He described her appearance and rig, and to our utter astonishment, when your vessel came into sight, she corresponded exactly to his description of her. We had not put much faith in what he had said, yet still we hoped there might be something in it. For drowning men, as you know, grasp at straws. As it turned out, I cannot doubt that it was all arranged by some overruling providence. There is no doubt, replied the captain of the bark, that the writing on the slate, let it come there as it may, saved all your lives. I was steering at the time considerably southwest, and I altered my course for the northwest, and had a look out aloft to see what would come of it. But you say, he added, turning to the passenger, that you did not dream of writing on a slate. No, sir. I have no recollection whatever of doing so. I got the impression that the bark I saw in my dream was coming to rescue us, but how that impression came, I cannot tell. There's another very strange thing about it, he added. Everything here on board seems to be quite familiar, yet I'm very sure that I was never on your vessel before. It is all a puzzle to me. What did your mate see? Thereupon, Mr. Bruce related to them all the circumstances above, in detail. If you like these stories and narrations, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and make sure your notification bell is turned on for future stories. The end.